We were sitting in the social area that forms a central hub for the living quarters of the inhabited section of the ship, referred to affectionately as the O.R.C cave by the crew members. The large wall screens showed broadcasted programming of movies, news, and sporting events through a haze of smoke and the din of loud conversation intermingled with the loud, monotonous beats and growling, savage poetry of modern music. Your typical O.R.C, orbital refuse collector, is an intelligent, skilled worker who at some point in their life was allowed to fall between the cracks of a society which leaves little exception for those who do not quickly conform to the social models. An O.R.C most generally reached a point in their lives when they were forced to make a choice between being a criminal or joining a salvage crew. My choice was made when I was a 20-year-old welder working 70 hours a week to provide for a guy I had met while in high school and our 2 children. One day I came home after a 3-week construction tour to find my small closet apartment empty and a recorded message on the house computer explaining what a waste of time I had been. He had emptied our accounts, filed for custody, and sued for alimony. With the money from our savings, he had managed to hire a lawyer with enough clout to ensure that I would barely ever see my children and would spend the rest of my life working so that he never would have to. My mother told me during a long, depressing video chat that it was ironic because 80 years ago, it would have been me who got the kids. That was back when they thought women were more nurturing than men, I said listlessly as I poured another shot of rum down my throat. You carried them in your womb, my mother shouted furiously, almost awakening her roommate at the rest care facility where she lived. How can a man have any claim on something which sprang from your body? I'd say because he stayed at home and raised them while I went to school and then worked. I never did understand why you would marry a man who didn't work outside the home. My mother's disappointment was a thick poison in her high-pitched, aged voice. Well, let's see, I said as I lit a cigarette and waxed philosophic. He was a great cook who was built like a Roman god, and he performed admirably in bed. That's exactly what I mean. How could I have raised 3 daughters who all think like they have a penis? I guess we got it from Dad, I said as I filled my glass again. So 10 years later, my kids were grown, my ex-husband remarried, while I sat drinking and playing cards on a floating heap, eternally searching the depths of space for the next big score. I did not hate this life, but admittedly, what had begun as a means of escaping what I saw as the injustice of my life on Earth had become a self-induced incarceration in the limbo of endless daily labor and nightly disregard. However, this night was going to be different. That night was when we came across the Keomar. The music stopped and the alarm sounded as the captain's gnarly tattooed face appeared on every wall screen. Attention, crew of the Scabrous, all hands to their posts. We have identified a Yamashita freighter in orbit of Titan. Scans show 0 life signs and we have visual which indicates it is salvageable. There was a roar of excitement as the crew dispersed in hurried droves down the hallways to their stations. A Yamashita freighter was a golden egg-laying goose in the archives of salvageable ships. The now-defunct company had run one of the most lucrative interstellar exploration, mining, and transportation businesses in human history. Back on Earth, in the 2020s, they were responsible for some of the greatest technological advances of the time, and the multinational conglomerate had nearly conquered space with its aggressive buying and absorption campaigns. A Yamashita freighter could be carrying close to anything, and whatever this one had was ours. As I entered the navigation room, I was met with the sight of Captain Kanula as he busily examined a field of holographic schematics which surrounded him in whirling squares of diagrams and numbers which he sifted through the air as if sorting clothes in a closet. "Damn it, Delphine," he said distantly, as he stared intently at a long report which filed through the air in red letters before him. "Something about this doesn't add up." "What's that, Captain?" I asked as I approached and attempted to read the passing lines. "There's no record of that freighter in the archive," he answered, stopping and staring at the particular paragraph. "I've got a model number, but this particular ship was never documented in this area. Yet logistics tell me it had to have locked in orbit over Titan within the past 3 decades. The crew had to have set its course and programmed its position, but there is not a living soul on board. Maybe they're all dead, I offered, as I looked at the outboard viewer and saw the massive freighter for the first time. The freighter was a massive floating compound of towers and storage domes hovering dead in empty space. They were hauling something big. A barge like that had to have been carrying ore or something incredibly valuable. That's not necessarily true, said Rigger, the head research consultant. Yamashita could have had anything out here. He adjusted his self-focusing electronic eye and glared at the small digital notebook on his lap. A long scar running down the back of his shaved head behind his ear marked him as a WINAR, wireless interface neural implant recipient, called winners, whiners, cyber mages, or Wi-Fi wizards by everyone else. Reger was one of the few chosen capable of interfacing with electronics via his own cerebral cortex. Our dating on the age of the freighter indicates it would have been launched just prior to Yamashita's decline. At that point, they had already had their hands in everything from molecular genetic manipulation to quantum breach physics. This ship would have been launched just prior to the Union's shutdown of Yamashita's major manufacturing centers. Which means it could be anything in there, and we don't know until we're on board, the captain stated more to himself than us. We're going to assemble a team and send it over immediately, Delphine. I want you to head the group. Are you up for that? I'll do it, but I want Huey, Marcella, and Reger, I replied as I gazed out the freighter with the dark foreboding rising as a coming storm in the back of my mind. Ask and you shall receive, he answered with a slight sideways smile. Whether he chose me for these missions because he trusted me, because we had slept together, or both, I did not venture to guess. However, the resentment from many of the crew did not seem to have an influence on any of his decisions for the better or worse. He ran the ship because he was too smart and too knowledgeable to be questioned. He listened to the advice of others, but when it came down to the choices he always made was his. The fact that he had chosen a welder as his right hand would have seemed ludicrous on a Union ship, but a salvage ship was not a democracy. The captain was always the one who had to put forth the capital, made the payments, and ensured that everyone got their share of the payoff. He had to be someone the grunts trusted and respected, so if Captain Canula made the welder that he banged on his off time his second in command, then so be it. My mother would be so proud. The small shuttle housed 5 of us as we made a steady course for the docking bay of the freighter. Once we had secured the side of the doors, I and the 3 others left the safety of the shuttle and manually entered and opened the doors by accessing and reactivating the power grid of the docking bay via power units on our shuttle. The first line of business upon entering a salvage wreck is assessing damage and managing reactivation of major systems. To our surprise, we found that the ship, whose name we had learned was Kaelmar, was fully functioning. The freighter, for reasons beyond our knowledge, had been set into a sleep mode after being carefully navigated into Titan's orbit. The interior of the ship was a vast maze of darkened corridors and countless lab facilities, which seemed to have been constructed in order to study every science known to man. After only a few hours of resetting life support and beginning our investigation, we had determined that Kaelmar's status as a freighter was a facade to disguise its true purpose as a deep space research facility. However, the nature of what was being studied in its hundreds of empty laboratories was still an enigma. The first clue as to the demise of its crew would arrive as we entered what we surmised to be the main meeting center for the ship. Any Yamashita freighter, functioning as a working corporate facility, in true Yamashita's capitalistic demeanor, the community center of the ship resembled a massive, seated auditorium. A ship the size of the Kaelmar would house anywhere from 150 to 300 crew members comfortably, and as we entered the massive doors of the briefing room, we found the location of each one. Every padded chair of the Coliseum seated the comfortably positioned corpse of a Kaelmar crew member. Officers, technicians, scientists, and laborers all sat slightly reclined and lifeless before the enormous viewing screen, which hung suspended before them at the forefront of the darkened metallic domed chamber. Reger approached the main console behind the screen, removing his helmet. With the aid of his cerebral implant, we watched as he sent himself, using the strange astral-like projection technique of the Wynar, into the mainframe's data cloud. There he initiated a replay of what had been the last running message played before the crowd of the corpses. As we waited, I turned to Huey, Mars, our navigational systems engineer, and said, "Why haven't any of the bodies decayed?" "My guess is that when the ship life support shut down, the room was sealed. With no oxygen, heat, or microscopic influences, the bodies were pretty well unaffected by anything that might cause deterioration." I nodded as I stared at the sea of pale, lifeless faces, which all sat, their heads tilted and eyes closed, as if they had all simply nodded off during the most boring lecture of all time. It was then my morbid reverie was disrupted as the illumination from the viewing screen bathed the room in the pale bluish light of the giant Y emblem of the Yamashita Enterprises. Soon the standard was replaced by the smiling face of a young brown-haired man who appeared to be seated at a desk in some expensive corporate office on Earth. I gazed up at the 20-foot-tall, white-toothed, grinning face and immediately felt ill at the silken, greasy smoothness of his appearance, the reptilian cold gleam in his shining eyes, one which was crystalline blue and the other which was a startling emerald green, sent a chill through my flesh despite my heated external traveling suit. "I thought Yamashita was a Japanese company," I said to Huey. "No, the original Yamashita was back at the turn of the century, but it was a multinational conglomerate. They kept the name Yamashita, but it was actually a monopoly, functioning at about 1,000 subsidiaries. Yamashita hadn't actually been run by Asians for over 3 decades. And who was running it? God only knows." It was then that the smiling man began to speak, with a smooth, diplomatic tone of assured confidence, his accent odd and unidentifiable. "Hello, and good day to the people of Yamashita. Remember that here at Yamashita, we're not just a business, we're a family. Now, I am sure that your administrators have been keeping you updated on the rather dicey business going on back here at the home office. With the worldwide financial difficulties which have been plaguing every business, it was only a matter of time until, yes, even we were affected. It is my unfortunate duty as the head representative for the subdivision of A913 of Yamashita Space to inform you that there have been some major cuts in the budgeting of your branch in the company. I am sure that all of you understand that these hard times it is hard for us to pull together and make sacrifices for the better good of the whole. After estimating the costs aligned to more or less non-profit research-oriented projects such as Kaelmar, we have determined that funding for such programs will cease immediately." I imagined an entire gathered assembly of employees floating out there in orbit, listening as they were told that they had lost their jobs. But the executive had not finished. Furthermore, the costs of returning Kaelmar to Earth at this time would far outweigh any beneficial aspects of retrieval. As you know, any data gathered in your exploration of this quadrant has already been collected here at our scientific headquarters, and so at this point, I must inform you that your scheduled return has been cancelled. Any supply shipments or maintenance requisitions have been suspended, and so it is with my deepest apologies that I suggest you refer to your employee guide, section BX112, entitled Self-Elimination. Once more, a good day to you all, and the best of luck on your journey into the next world." We stood in silence as once more the giant blue Y appeared on the screen before ominously fading to black. We stared at each other in the cold, still silence of the freight ship turned tomb. "So this was a mass suicide," I said, as I studied each and every face that sprawled around me in the auditorium. My mind began a random sequence of imaginings as I thought of cyanide capsules or syringes loaded with lethal injections being passed around the auditorium like a dessert tray. "They didn't have a choice," Reger explained as he studied the console before him. By the time they received this message, they only had supplies and maintenance for a few weeks left. I don't get it. This ship would have been worth millions. As I tried to comprehend the sheer heartlessness and calculated insanity such an action would require. Yamashita was planning on retrieving the freighter later, I'm sure. Huey said this with disgust as he removed his suit's rubbery-fitted glove to dry the shameful droplets gathering in the corners of his dark eyes. Marcella, our navigations lead, had been silent throughout the entire ordeal, now opened her visor and wept openly as she clutched her mobile coordinate processor case to her chest, as if it were a child's comforting favorite stuffed animal. Oh, it makes sense in a very psychopathically corporate way. They just cut the funding and killed the crew so that they wouldn't have to spend any more keeping them alive. Then they put the ship asleep until they got back on their feet. And then they come on out and pick it up like nothing happened. Except they never got back on their feet, Huey said, chuckling bitterly. Well, it's ours now. He stared at me and I realized that he was waiting for me to open the communication line to the captain. Can we seriously do this? I said, pulling my helmet free and holding it trembling in my hands as I gazed from the Titanic blank auditorium screen to each of their questioning faces. It's our job, Reger answered. This could be the biggest haul of our lives, Delphine, he said, his eyes stern. I know that when they did this to these people it was wrong, but that was a long time ago. These people are dead. We are alive. We are alive, and we need money, Marcella whispered with angry resolve. Fine, I said as I hit the receiver button on my wrist control console and opened the line to the captain. God forgive us, I muttered as I heard the captain's voice through the small, imperceptible speakers on the shoulders of our field suits. Hey, Delphine. His voice was low and strange as all of us listened to his troubled, wavering voice. Yes, Captain, we've established reactivation of the ship's primary power core, and we're preparing to leave. I'm sorry, Delphine. His voice was breaking with emotion. But I may not be able to do that. Why not? I said as my hands suddenly went cold and clammy, my heart pounding in my chest. Delphine, he said slowly. After our ship computer connected with the life support system on the freighter, we detected an unknown substance being released into the oxygen supply through the air ducts from one of the Kael'mar's labs. What kind of substance? The others gazed at me with mounting anxiety. We think it's some kind of bacteria, he answered, and I heard his voice crack adolescently with emotion. Dr. Burb thinks it might be something biologically manufactured, something they were working on aboard the ship before it shut down. Somebody programmed it to be released when the ship was ever brought out of stasis. The others listened to the captain's words with gradual and anxious comprehension. We think that it was set up so that if anyone ever came to retrieve the freighter, it would automatically become contaminated, possibly with the hope that it would be brought back to Earth. What does Burb think the bacteria will do? As the words left my lips, I saw the panic begin to burn like sudden electric bursts in my teammates' eyes. There's no way to tell, but you have to answer me honestly, Delphine. I was watching, waiting to see something happen as the others three moved in closer. Have any of you removed any part of your outer travel suits? Yes, we all did. The words were like coins being tossed into the depths of the black, centered, bottomless well, clear and ringing as they bounced from the stones into limbo. I remembered each of us, one by one, exposing ourselves. Reger's helmet, Huey's glove, Marcella's visor, and my own helmet just a moment before. What do we know about it? What will it do, Captain? All we know is that it was originally contained in a unit called Lab a dream, we rushed from the auditorium and down through the passage to one of the service elevators. Following Rager's directions as his mind surveyed the ship's layout, we made our way through the research department until we had a single door labeled Lab 99. Rager accessed the entrance code, and we walked into the room, realizing with horror the true scale of what we had stumbled upon. It was becoming clear that what Yamashita had disguised as a simple freighter was in fact a floating experimental facility for those projects considered too dangerous to be carried out on Earth. This particular lab was filled with a variety of small insular units, each marked with various codes denoting said project's identities. One such unit was blinking with a variety of orange lights which indicated its activation. Rager hastily sat before the router modem and, closing his eyes, projected into the system. He stared off into space as he began to read the information which was appearing directly within his cerebrum. After a moment, his eyes widened as his dry, pale lips began to quiver. After what had seemed an eternity, he looked at all of us, with streamlets streaking down his high, hollow cheeks, and prepared to speak. I can only really understand one thing from their encryption. It's a bacterium, but I can only make out one word in its description. What? Marcelo was sobbing uncontrollably from the brink of hysteria. Necrotic, he whispered, as I saw a sore begin to open, as if in speeded replay on his cheek where the streams of tears were running. It's some kind of flesh-eating bacteria. For several more moments there was only silence, which was finally broken by the soul-ripping sounds and screams of Marcella, staring down in horror at her hands. I felt an awful scratching beneath the lining fabric of my inner clothing, which soon escalated into an agonizing chemical burn. In my mind, I realized that the crew of the Kielmar would have their revenge, perhaps not on some company retrieval ship, but on a team of greedy O.R.Cs come to turn a profit on the devastation of their tragic lives and deaths. I could not help but wonder at the justice and irony of our terrifying and bitter demise as I saw blisters bubbling black and eruptive on Rager's bald scalp. Marcella's hands reached to her face as she clawed at her eyes frantically, and then fell to her knees screaming as she pulled away the thin flesh of her eyelids as if it was only some viscous, soft slime. Rager had reached to the now bursting boils on his neck and found the skin sloughing off in long strips, revealing the pink, bloody bone and tissue beneath. Every passing second unveiled a new horror as Huey screamed in agony, only to have the tissue between his jaw and cheeks split wide open like torn wet paper to reveal the softening gums of his interior mouth, liquefying around white teeth which loosened and dislodged around a now purple, writhing tongue. Within my suit, my skin was degenerated into a soupy liquid mash as one eye seemed to loosen within the socket and expel from my skull to dangle on a deteriorating nerve stalk. Huey was a melting sculpture of tissue, muscle, and bone held solid only by the molding of the suit as he collapsed to the floor with a sound like a wet, soft bag of mud. One last scream tried to explode from my lungs, but in place of screams of pain and terror, there came only an expulsion of pink molten gore as I spewed out my own lungs through the dislodging soft bone of my dislocated jaws, although perhaps only a vague vision created by my failing brain. I could have sworn I saw eerie